we go. Here's
All right.
hitting record. So, hello, Peter. I'm really grateful that we have a chance to talk today. For those who are listening in, Peter Gamwell is an educator, a teacher, leader in the Ottawa area. I've worked with Peter over the course of years, mostly on a really spectacular book called The Wonder Wall. And I'll ask Peter to elaborate a little bit on that. But so much of Peter's work in the past has been in the realm of creativity and innovation. And so I wanted to just talk to him and explore that a little bit more. But Peter, maybe start by talking a little bit about the Wonder Wall and what the message is from that book.
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning, Arnie. It's great to be back together again after these years, and congratulations on your retirement. Yeah, so I had a lengthy career in education, which spanned actually from kindergarten right through to university, and I was a teacher. I was a vice principal, principal. I went through the gamut, and I ended up being appointed superintendent with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, and that was, I think it was 2003, 2004 until I retired. And one of the opportunities I had there was I was given responsibility for leadership from across the district, which was intimidating at first, let me tell you, because it's a very large district. Anyway, that quickly morphed into a movement which blended together learning, leadership, and creativity, and explored the intersections of those. And it was a culture-changing movement, which was characterized by 7 or 8 happenings each year. They were like conferences, but they were more coming togethers. And it was very much focused on several central ideas. Number one, within absolutely everybody, there is a seed of brilliance. And we need to embrace that as a learning community, and we need to mobilize that. We need to set up our structures and our entire learning culture in a way that cultivates those seeds. It's also based on the idea that everybody has creativity within them, everybody. So often creativity is conflated with the arts and very clever scientists. And then thirdly is this the concept of celebration. So at every single one of these events, we had creative initiatives, not just from the schools, but from out in the broader community. So as soon as you walked into one of these events, you didn't have to wonder what it was about. It was about the celebration of creativity and brilliance that lies across human understanding. And the other critical thing about this movement was this. I think one of the challenges in conventional organizations, and it's definitely within traditional education systems, is they tend to be very hierarchical in structure across many different parameters, but specifically in terms of how we define and manifest leadership. So one of the things that we took on board from the very beginning was to flatten the hierarchy. And rather than the formal leaders taking the shape of the leadership and imposing the direction of this, we very much embraced the idea that, look, absolutely everybody has leadership characteristics. And if you can create the space in which those leadership characteristics emerge and are allowed to flourish, that's when the magic happens in organizations. That's when you see things happen that you don't when people feel suppressed.
Peter, you mentioned the number of events that you had every year. Who attended those events? What kind of the constituency of the events, and how were they planned?
So that was one of the things. Originally, at the very beginning when I took over, there were just 2 events each year. One was for principals and trustees, and who else was involved in there? Some of the local politicians. And then the second one was for vice principals and trustees and superintendents. So it was, again, very hierarchical, which is great, except it lacks diversity. So one of the things we did immediately, we did a huge study of the across the organization. We found out very quickly it was about leadership and how people perceived their sense of belonging to the district. And we got some very honest feedback, people saying, well, they really didn't feel. They felt disenfranchised, they felt marginalized, they didn't feel connected or valued. So one of the very first things we did was to say, okay, these two conferences, yeah, they're for formal leaders, but we asked every formal leader to bring somebody from their school community. We didn't care who it was. It could be a student. It could be the school custodian. It could be a business person. And that instantly changed the conversation, because now you've got a real diversity. We were also very intentional about reaching to our multicultural community and to our Indigenous partners. So it was about, so in other words, at every single one of these events, there would be representation from across that broad spectrum.
So as you were developing the new culture of creativity and innovation, it would seem to me that you'd have to really change the way your staff thought about the school, thought about their students, because there are very traditional ways of thinking about that, and you're looking at a non-traditional kind of approach. So how did you do that, and did it sort of the training, the discussions, the kind of planning that you did with the staff, but also how did that impact who you were looking for to have on staff?
That's interesting. So first of all, I would say we did not look at it as a training exercise, because training brings with it comes back to this idea of hierarchy, like who's deciding on what's going to be trained and who's going to be trained and how are they going to be trained. So what this movement did was it pulsed out. See, each of these 7 or 8 events were connected by those 3 characteristics that I've mentioned earlier. Seeds of brilliance in everybody. Everybody has creative capacity, and we need to flatten leadership and make it inclusive. So what we did through having these creative initiatives at each of the events, we were sowing the seeds in people's minds, in the minds of educators in the schools, that look, you can do things differently. You can take a risk in your classroom, and rather than just always depend upon the hierarchical forms of teaching, where actually this is a bit amusing, it's a bit naughty, but a friend of mine, Dr. Bobby Moore, who passed away recently, he used to refer to it as the types of teaching that went from the textbook of the professor to the notebook of the student without being processed by the brain of either. Anyway, but you get the concept, the type of teaching which is the teacher gives the kid the information, and then there's some form of processing that goes back, and then the kid regurgitates it back. But what we were saying was there might be a place for that sometimes, but actually, if you can move to things like project-based learning and passion-based learning, where you really give not only staff, but students voice and choice, that's when you see the magic of learning. That's when you see what I always look for. I think of it as the holy grail of learning. When you walk into a classroom and nobody notices you because they are so intensely focused on whatever it is they're doing, that's what the positive psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi refers to as flow. That's where we need to lead our kids. And that doesn't come from a teacher standing in front of a classroom imparting knowledge to a kid, which is then regurgitated. It has to come from the passions and the interests and the fascinations and curiosity of the people within the organization.
Sure. But what you're describing even still is a very different way for teachers to view their classes, their teaching. So how do you if you're the leader and that's the vision that you have, how do you instill that vision, or how do you, I mean, I think in any school you're going to have staff that resists. I mean, my notes are this, and I've always taught this way. So
Yeah.
how do you get around that? How do you work with that?
Constant modeling. So we didn't even call them conferences somewhere, but these happenings, we constantly model to people how magical it is when things are looked at from different perspectives. When you allow people, when you say to somebody, look, I'm going to give you 6 weeks now to come up with a project of your own. It can be on anything. And when you see what emerges at the other end of that, it's just inspiring. So by that constant modeling, it started to happen within the schools within a very short period of time. I would say it took a couple of years, but by 2006, 2007, suddenly it started. I'll give you one very specific example. I get a phone call from this a principal, Jennifer Offord. And she said, Peter, you have to come to the school and see what's going on. So I go to the school, and there in her office is this huge mannequin. We tell this story in the Wonder Wall. This huge mannequin doll dressed in weird clothing. I said, what's going on here? And she said, look, you need to know that one of the teachers came to me about at the beginning of the year and said, he said in his own words, I'm 15 years into my career and I can't do it like this anymore. I cannot just play the game of giving information out. And he knew he was seen as a very good intermediate math teacher. So he researched and came up with the idea of Genius Hour, this thing that was done by FedEx and by Google, I believe. And it's where you do give people 2 or 3 hours a week to go and do something.
IBM, yeah.
Yeah, IBM, was it? Sorry. And so he went to Jennifer and said, would you allow me to explore this? And she said, do you have anybody with you? He said, yeah, I've got 4 other teachers. And she took a huge risk because at the time that they started this, the Ministry of Education was very much focused on you need to spend as much time as you can on literacy and mathematics, okay? And in a very specific, focused way. So Jennifer took a huge risk and just said, you know what, do it. He got the entire division involved. And I think it was a 6-week process, 2 or 3 hours a week on a Friday afternoon. Teachers got involved in doing the Genius Hour projects. But one of the fascinating things about it was often the things that the kids came up with, their passions, there was nobody on staff to help them. So what do? They go into the community. Now the community comes in and they get excited about this. Anyway, this one little girl who she'd struggled through school. And when they stood in front of her and said, look, you can do anything you like, whatever you're passionate about. And it dawned on her, well, I'm passionate about fashion. And I love history. And so she created this mannequin doll and dressed it in items of clothing representing every decade from the 20th century. And then she said to her mum, but they want me to present this and they want it to be special. So she created a booklet. Now, when this kid, Emerson, got up and did this at the end, there was silence in the room. Nobody expected this from Emerson. And it's just a beautiful story. And it's not fault of educators. It's because the system is so narrowly focused on what we consider to be intelligence that we miss an awful lot. So I did more than I called up, I asked Jennifer to call the mum and put her in touch with me, Emerson's mum. And I went over and I apologized. I said, look, this is unacceptable that we've missed your daughter so badly. And I said, do you mind if I interview? And she said, well, absolutely. And then something came to me. I said, do you mind if I video this? I've got 45 minutes of this brilliant young mind describing those first 8 years of school. And it was a stark reminder to me that we need to be very open and very inclusive and create the space so that that type of thing doesn't happen.
Sure, sure. So inevitably, you're going to have in any school turnover in staff, new people coming in. When you're looking for new people, when you were in your situation, or even in what do you suggest school leaders should do? What kind of characteristics, what kind of traits, what
Yeah.
questions should they ask?
So many years ago, I started to unfold in my mind, how can you bring to life a culture that really awakens the fact that there are seeds of brilliance in everybody, the fact that we need to continually focus on strength-based approaches as opposed to the rabbit hole of deficit thinking, and thirdly, by fostering cultures of belonging. So I thought, okay, get specific, Gamwell. What are you looking for? And the first thing is this: it's a culture that embraces storytelling and listening at its very core, because everybody has a story to tell. Mm-hmm. And the more you listen to those stories, the richer the community becomes. Secondly, we need to make learning personal, just as the story of Emerson. Like, what is it that the teachers and the kids are interested in, and how can we set fire to those passions? Thirdly, it needs to be foundationally inclusive. And fourthly, the culture needs to be celebratory. And I don't mean an assembly every 6 weeks to say who's got the best marks. I mean infused through the DNA. So to your question now, that's what I'm looking for in an interview. I'm asking people to tell me their story. How have they made learning personal in their lives? How have they ensured inclusivity? And how in very specific terms, how do they celebrate that beauty of learning in the culture within their in? And you can really, by listening to them, you can really usually tell in a very genuine way, because they're not easy questions to answer and make up. You have to have very specific responses.
Sure. I know. I think the very difficult questions actually, and I think it would take responses that would lead you to want to have them work with you. So, mm-hmm. I mean, that I think that's so great. Given sort of the culture that was being built, how did you know when it was successful? What were the marks? What were the criteria? What could you see that you said, "Gosh, this is really working"?
I'm going to go back to my friend Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and that's when you would see, as you walk through the school, you would see evidence of people just immersed in what they were doing. People doing things differently, taking risks, and there's this concept of psychological safety, which should be at the core of any organization, not just schools, but where people feel absolutely free to explore their learning and their interests and their curiosity in any way that makes sense to them. The whole concept of we need to let kids make sense of the world in a way the world makes sense to them. It's the same thing with staff. And when you really see this, when you see that happening in the school, I'll give you an example. I'm working with this. A principal reached out to me from Osgood High School, which is a small community outside Ottawa, and he actually took the book Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, and he set it up as a book club with some members of his staff and a student, and I think there was somebody from outside the school. And so when they got to the end of the book club, he's now wanting to put that in action in the school. So one of the teachers involved said, will you come into my classroom? She's a grade 11, grade 12 biology teacher. Her name is Jennifer Bonse. And it is inspiring. You don't have to ask if those kids are engaged when you walk in there. The way they approach the work, she is never at the front of the classroom talking. She sets them up with learning modules, but they explore in ways of their own. And then the final project, again, there's no exams and there's no quizzes. The final project is them making sense of the biology in a way that makes sense to them and presenting their findings and their understanding of the coursework in any way they want to. It's hard to describe. Well, you'll see. I've taken lots of videos of this. It's actually going to be a part of my next writing project. But it's when you see that there's an awakening, and kids who would maybe not normally in traditional classes be the most responsive, when you see them absolutely focused, you're on the right track.
Sure. So, yeah, and I think as you mentioned earlier, you're looking for the flow
Yeah.
in a lot of this. So let me ask, and this may be me being a school leader from way in the past and being a bit more conservative. I think in any situation you may well have students who don't care about this, who are going to look for ways to get out of doing things. I mean, that'll happen in any situation. But do you find that you can draw them along, bring them along?
You broke up there a bit, Arnie. Did you ask if you can draw those kids and bring them along more successfully in those environments?
Yes. Have you found? Yes. Do kinds of things that you were doing for creativity and innovation, was that successful in not bringing along all students, especially those who maybe would tend to tune out or be kind of considered the not very successful students?
It's especially magical with those students. There's a teacher called Rebecca Chambers. I have to go to stories to bring this to life for you. And Rebecca was a teacher in Ottawa, and it's a high school teacher, social studies. And again, when you first walked into her classroom, you might think, well, this is chaotic because there are either kids everywhere or sometimes there are no kids. And Rebecca had a 3-stage approach to her learning. Again, there were no textbooks, no exams, and no quizzes. The first thing she did with those kids was she took them on a journey of self-discovery, who they were as learners, how best they learned. Secondly, she introduced them to the idea that there are many, many ways to come to know what we know. And the more of those avenues and the more of those ways of knowing that you explore, the richer you will be as a learner. And thirdly, she worked on the what's the word, on the community, the imperative that they provide positivity to their community. And so all of them had to do something in the community which resonated with them. So they had to make a change in a way that they wanted the change to be made. I've got about 75 interviews because the final presentation was just that. They would all get together in the resource center and the kids would present using some metaphor their learning journey. And let me tell you that over the years, and I can say this because there are enough kids, many of those kids, many of them had not done well in other classes and they excelled. I'm gonna send you a few of the video links later. Well, they're all on my website. You can see them. But when you talk to these kids, there's this
Sure.
one kid called Saxon, and I walked into this learning fair, and anybody from the community was welcome to come in and talk to these kids. And Saxon had built himself a cardboard jail, and he was inside the jail, handcuffed. And this was his metaphor to how he had felt throughout his schooling. The fact that he'd not been allowed to express himself. That is a 4-minute video that you want to listen to. He is so brilliant in the way he talks about what this form of learning with Rebecca Chambers had done for him.
That's great. Peter, we're actually, the video is breaking up a little bit from time and again, but I think we can edit through that a bit, so that'll work. But I'm guessing we really want to finish up fairly soon. What have I not asked that I should ask you? What thoughts do you have that you would still like to express?
I think that look, this is not Pollyanna, Arnie. I've got Sorry? Are we together?
No, you're freezing.
I
couldn't get that. Peter, are there any thoughts, any ideas that you'd like to express, like to share, that I did not ask about yet?
Yeah. I was just saying that this is not Pollyanna. There are all sorts of people who will balk against this, who will say, well, this isn't possible. We need to focus on test results. Our society is way, way beyond that now. The idea that our dear friend Seken used to talk about of the imperative to transform learning. I think most people who know anything about this will say, yeah, we absolutely do need to transform it, not tinker with it, transform it. Because if we're going to prepare these kids for the incredible complexity of the future, if we're going to prepare them to survive, let alone thrive, we cannot do it through looking at the rear view mirror and do things how we have been. We have to expose them to the brilliance that lies within them. We have to expose them and provide them with the capacity to be resilient for what they're going to face. And we have to grow their compassion and their emotional intelligence to do things in community and to reach out to those around them. So my wish is that for those people out there, and there's one or two in every school who are trying to do things differently, don't listen to the naysayers. It takes incredible backbone, because very often when you stand up and do things differently in a school, you got people around you who are going to try and take you down for whatever reason, but it's a common theme. Well, I would say have the strength, find your support systems around you. Reach out to me if you'd like to, by the way, and keep doing what you're doing, because the end result is too important. So, and I'm a great believer in chaos theory, and that's the butterfly wings over the Pacific. You never know the impact that you're going to have on young people's lives, and if you continue this strength-based positive approach and provide them voice and choice, the likelihood is you are going to change many, many lives.
Thanks, Peter. I think that's a great message, and I think it's so important. As you said, that you just don't know what are the positive steps you're taking today that are going to get students ready for a future that we don't know what it is. They don't know what it is. It's not important for them to know about the Stamp Act or or the year that such and such happened, but it's important for them to be able to think about their situations and how to create better situations for themselves, how to work within that change. And it's one of those things that Eric Scheninger talks about, sort of working through disruptive times.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Peter. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll move on from here.
Thanks very much,
Let me
Annie.
just see if I can get to it.